in which I learn about birds and people. Frightful and I settled down to living in snow. We went to bed early, slept late, ate the mountain harvest, and explored the country alone. Oh, the deer walked with us, the foxes followed in our footsteps, the winter birds flew over our heads, but mostly we were alone in the white wilderness. It was nice. It was very, very nice. My deerskin rabbit-lined suit was so warm that even when my breath froze in my nostrils, my body was snug and comfortable. Frightful fluffed on the coldest days, but a good flight into the air around the mountain would warm her, and she would come back to my fist with a thump and a flip. This was her signal of good spirits. I did not become lonely. Many times during the summer I had thought of the long winter months ahead, with some fear. I had read so much about the loneliness of the farmer, the trapper, the woodsman during the bleakness of winter, that I had come to believe it. The winter was as exciting as the summer, maybe more so. The birds were magnificent and almost tame. They talked to each other, warned each other, fought for food, for kingship, for the right to make the most noise. Sometimes I would sit in my doorway, which became an entrance to behold a portico of pure white snow adorned with snowmen, and watch them with endless interest. They reminded me of Third Avenue, and I gave them the names that seemed to fit. There was Mr. Brackett. He lived on the first floor of apartment house, and no one could sit on his step or even make a noise near his door without being chased. Mr. Brackett, the chickadee, spent most of his time chasing the young chickadees through the woods. Only his mate could share his favorite perches and feeding places. Then there was Mrs. O'Brien, Mrs. Calloway, and Mrs. Fiderio. On Third Avenue they would all go off to the market together first thing in the morning, talking and pushing and stopping to lecture to children in gutters and streets. Mrs. Fiderio always followed Mrs. O'Brien, and Mrs. O'Brien always followed Mrs. Calloway, in talking and pushing and even in buying an apple. And there they were again in my hemlock, 3 busy chickadees. They would flit and rush around and click and fly from one eating spot to another. They were noisy, scolding, and busily following each other. All the other chickadees followed them, and they made way only for Mr. Brackett. The chickadees, like the people on Third Avenue, had their favorite routes to and from the best food supplies. They each had their own resting perches, and each had a little shelter in a tree cavity to which they would fly when the day was over. They would chatter and call good night and make a big fuss before they parted, and then the forest would be as quiet as the apartment house on Third Avenue when all the kids were off the streets and all the parents had said their last words to each other and everyone had gone to their little hole, own little hole. Sometimes when the wind howled and the snows blew, the chickadees blew or would be out for only a few hours. Even Mr. Brackett, who had been elected by the chickadees to test whether or not it was too stormy for good hunting, would appear for a few hours and disappear. Sometimes I would find him just sitting quietly on a limb next to the bole of a tree, all fluffed up and doing nothing. There was no one who enjoyed doing nothing on a bad day than Mr. Brackett of Third Avenue. Frightful, the 2 Mr. Bracketts and I shared this feeling. When the ice and sleet and snow drove down through the hemlocks, we all holed up. I looked at my calendar pole one day and realized that it was almost Christmas. Banda will come, I thought. I'll have to prepare a feast and make a present for him. I took stock of the frozen venison and decided that there were enough steaks for us to eat nothing but venison for a month. I scooped under the snow for teaberry plants to boil down and pour over snowballs for dessert. I checked my cache of blown onions to see if I had enough to make onion soup and set aside some large firm ground nuts for mashed potatoes. There were still piles of dog-tooth violet bulbs and Solomon's seal roots and a few dried apples. I cracked nuts, hickory nuts, and beech nuts, then began a pair of deer-hide moccasins to be lined with rabbit fur for Bando's present. I finished these before Christmas, so I started a hat of the same materials. 2 days before Christmas, I began to wonder if Bando would come. He had forgotten, I was sure, or he was busy, I said, or he thought that I was no longer here and decided not to tramp out through the snows to find out. On Christmas Eve, Bando still had not arrived, and I began to plan for a very small Christmas with Frightful. About 4:30 Christmas Eve, I hung a small red cluster of tea berries on the deerskin door. I went in my tree room for a snack of beef nuts when I heard a faint hello from far down the mountain. I snuffed out my tallow candle, jumped into my coat and moccasins, and plunged out into the snow. Again a hello floated over the quiet snow. I took a bearing on the sound and bounced down the hill to meet Bando. I ran into him just as he turned up the valley to follow the stream bed. I was so glad to see him that I hugged him and pounded him on the back. Never thought I'd make it, he said. I walked all the way from the entrance to the state park. Pretty good, eh? He smiled and slapped his tired legs, then he grabbed my arm with 3 quick pinches, tested the meat on me. You've been living well, he said. He looked closely at my face. But you're going to need a shave in a year or two. I thanked him and we sprang up the mountain, cut across through the gorge and home. How's the Frightful? He asked as we were inside and the light was lit. I whistled. She jumped in my fist. He got bold and stroked her. The jam? He asked. Excellent, except the crooks are absorbent and are sopping up all the juice. Well, I brought you some more sugar. We'll try next year. Merry Christmas, Thoreau, he shouted and looked about the room. I have seen you've been busy. A blanket, new clothes, and an ingenious fireplace with a real chimney. And you say you have silverware. He picked up the forks I had carved. We ate smoked fish for dinner with boiled dogtooth violet bulbs. Walnuts dipped in jam were dessert. Bando was pleased with his jam. When we were done, Bando stretched out on his bed. He propped his feet up and lit his pipe. And now, I have something to show you, he said. He reached in his coat pocket and took out a newspaper clipping. It was from a New York paper and it read, Wild boy suspected living off deer and nuts in wilderness of Catskills. I looked at Bando and leaned over to read the headline myself. Have you been talking? I asked. Me? Don't be ridiculous. You have had several visitors other than me. The fire warden, the old lady, I cried out. Now, Thoreau, this could only be a rumor. Just because it is in print doesn't mean it's true. Before you get excited, sit still and listen, he read. Residents of Daly in the Catskill Mountains report that a wild boy who lives off deer and nuts is hiding out in the mountains. Several hunters stated that this boy stole deer from them during hunting season. I did not, I shouted. I only took the ones that they have wounded and couldn't find. Well, that's what they told their wives when they came home without their deer. Anyway, listen to this. This wild boy has been seen from time to time by Catskill residents, some of whom believe he is crazy. Well, that's a terrible thing to say. Just awful, he stated. Any normal red-blooded American boy wants to live in a treehouse and trap his own food. They just don't do it, that's all. Read on, I said. Officials say there is no evidence of any boy living alone in the mountains, and add that all abandoned houses and sheds are routinely checked for just such events. Nevertheless, the residents are sure that such a boy exists. End story. That's a lot of nonsense. I leaned back against the bedstead and laughed and smiled. Ho ho, don't think that ends it, Bando said, and reached in his pocket for another clipping. This one is dated December 5th. The other was November 23rd. Shall I read? Yes. Old woman reports meeting wild boy while picking strawberries in Catskills. Mrs. Thomas Fielder, 97, resident of Delhi, New York, told this reporter that she met a wild boy on Bitter Mountain last June while gathering her annual strawberry jelly supply. She said the boy was brown-haired, dusty, and wandered aimlessly around the mountains. However, she added he seemed to be in good flesh and happy. The old woman, a resident of the mountain resort town of 97 years, for 97 years, called this office to report her observation. Local residents report that Mrs. Fielder is a fine old member of the community who only occasionally sees imaginary things. Bando roared. I must say I was sweating, for I really did not expect this turn of events. And now, went on Bando, and now the queen of the New York papers. And this story was buried on page 19. No sensationalism for this paper. Boy reported living off land in Catskills. A young boy of 17 or 18 who left home with a group of Boy Scouts is reported to be still scouting in that area, according to the fire warden of the Catskill Mountains. Evidence of someone living in the forest, a fireplace, soup bones, and cracked nuts was reported by Warden Jim Handy, who spent the night in the wilderness looking for the lad. Jim stated the young man had apparently left the area as there was no evidence of his camp upon a second trip. What second trip? I asked. Bando puffed his pipe, looked at me wistfully, and said, "Are you ready to listen?" "Sure," I answered. "Well, here's the rest of it. There was no trace of his camp on a second trip, and the warden believes that the young man returned to his home at the end of the summer. You know, Thoreau, I could scarcely drag myself away from the newspapers to come up here. You make a marvelous story." I said, "Put more wood on the fire. It is Christmas. No one will be searching these mountains until May Day." Bando asked for the willow whistles. I got them for him, and after running the scale several times, he said, "Let us serenade the ingenuity of the American newspapermen. Then let us serenade the conservationists who have protected the American wilderness so that a boy can still be alone in this world of millions of people." I thought that was suitable, and we played Holy Night. We tried the 12 Days of Christmas, but the whistles were too stiff and Bando too tired. "Thoreau, my body needs rest. Let's give up," he said after 2 bad starts. I banked the fire and blew out the candle and slept in my clothes. It was Christmas when we woke. Breakfast was light, acorn pancakes, jam, and sassafras tea. Bando went for a walk. I lit the fire in the fireplace and spent the morning creating a feast from the wilderness. I gave Bando his presents when he returned. He liked them. He was really pleased. I could tell by his eyebrows. They went up and down and in and out. Furthermore, I know he liked the presents because he wore them. The onion soup was about to be served when I heard a voice shouting in the distance. "I know you were there! I know you were there! Where are you?" "Dad?" I screamed and dove right through the door onto my stomach. I all but fell down the mountain shouting, "Dad! Dad, where are you?" I found him resting in a snowdrift looking at the cardinal pair that lived near the stream. He was smiling, stretched out on his back, not in exhaustion but in joy. "Merry Christmas!" he whooped. I ran toward him. He jumped to his feet, tackled me, thumped my chest, and rubbed snow in my face. Then he stood up, lifted me from the snow by the pockets of my coat, and held me off the ground so that we were eye to eye. He sure smiled. He threw me down the snow again and wrestled with me for a few moments. Our formal greeting done, we strode up the mountain. "Well, son," he began, "I've been reading about you in the papers, and I can no longer resist the temptation to visit you. I still can't believe you did it." His arms went around me. He looked real good, and I was overjoyed to see him. "How did you find me?" I asked eagerly. "I went to Mrs. Fodor, and she told me which mountain. At the stream I found your rafts and ice fishing holes. Then I looked for trails and footsteps. When I thought it was getting warm, I hollered. Am I that easy to find?" He didn't have to answer, and I'd probably have frozen in the snow. He was pleased and not angry at me at all. He said again, "I just didn't think you'd do it. I was sure you'd be back the next day. When you weren't, I bet on the next week, then the next month. How's it going?" "Oh, it's a wonderful life, Dad." When we walked to the tree, Bando was putting the final touches on the venison steak. "Dad, this is my friend, Professor Bando. He's a teacher. He got lost one day last summer and stumbled onto my camp. He liked it so well that he came back for Christmas. Bando, meet my father." Bando turned the steak on the spit, rose, and shook my father's hand. "I am pleased to meet the man who sired this boy," he said grandly. I could see that they liked each other, and it was going to be a splendid Christmas. Dad stretched out on the bed and looked around. "I thought maybe you'd pick a cave," he said. "The papers reported that they were looking for you in old sheds and houses, but I knew better than that. However, I never would have thought of the inside of a tree. What a beauty! Very clever, son. Very, very clever. This is a comfortable bed." He noticed my food caches, stood and peered into them. "Got enough to last until spring?" "I think so," I said. "If I don't keep getting hungry visitors all the time." I winked at him. "Well, I would wear out my welcome by a year if I could, but I have to get back to work soon after Christmas." How's Mom and all the rest? I asked as I took down the turtle shell plates and set them on the floor. She's marvelous. How she manages to feed and clothe those 8 youngsters on what I bring her, I don't know, but she does it. She sends her love and says she hopes you're eating well balanced meals. The onion soup was simmering and ready. I gave Dad his. First course, I said. He breathed deeply of the odor and downed it boiling hot. Son, this is better soup than the chef at Waldorf can make. Bando sipped his and I put mine in the snow to cool. Your mother will stop worrying about your diet when she hears of this. Bando rinsed Dad's soup bowl in the snow, and with great ceremony and elegance, he could really be elegant when the occasion arose, poured him a turtle shell of sassafras tea. Quoting a passage from one of Dickens' food-eating scenes, he carved the blackened steak. It was pink and juicy inside, cooked to perfection. We were all proud of it. Dad had to finish his tea before he could eat. I was short on bowls. Then I filled his shell, a mound of sort of fluffy mashed cattail tubers, mushrooms, and dog-tooth violet bulbs, smothered in great gravy thickened with acorn powder. Each plate had a pile of soaked and stewed honey locust beans mixed with hickory nuts. The beans were so hard it took 3 days to soak them. It was a glorious feast. Everyone was impressed, including me. When we were done, Bando went down to the stream and cut some old dried and hollow reeds. He came back and carefully made us each a flute with the tip of his penknife. He said the willow whistles were too old for such an occasion. We all played Christmas carols until dark. Bando wanted to try some complicated jazz tunes, but the late hour, the small fire dancing and throwing heat, and the snow insulating us from the winds made us all so sleepy that we were not capable of more than a last slow rendition of taps before we put ourselves on in underskins and blew out the light. Before anyone was awake the next morning, I heard Frightful call hungrily. I had put her outside to sleep as we were very crowded. I went out to find her. Her Christmas dinner had been a big piece of venison, but the night air had enlarged her appetite. I called her to my fist, and we went into the meadow to rustle up breakfast for the guests. She was about to go after Rabbit, but I thought that wasn't proper fare for a post-Christmas breakfast, so we went to the stream. Frightful caught herself a pheasant while I kicked a hole in the ice and did a little ice fishing. I caught about 6 trout and whistled Frightful to my hand. We returned to the hemlock. Dad and Bando were still asleep with their feet in each other's faces, but both looked very content. I built the fire and was cooking the fish and making pancakes when Dad shot out of bed. Wild boy, he shouted, what a sanguine smell! What a purposeful fire! Breakfast in a tree! Son, I toil from sun-up to sundown. Never have I lived so well. I served him. He choked a bit on the acorn pancakes. They were a little flat and hard, but Bando got out some of his blueberry jam and smothered the pancakes with an enormous portion. Dad went through the motions of eating this. The fish, however, he enjoyed, and he asked for more. We drank sassafras tea, sweetened with some of the sugar Bando had brought me, rubbed our turtle shells clean in the snow, and went out into the forest. Dad had not met Frightful. When she winged down out of the hemlock, he ducked and flattened out in the snow, shouting, Blast off! He was very cold towards Frightful until he learned that she was the best provider we had ever had in our family, and then he continually praised her beauty and admired her talents. He even tried to pet her, but Frightful was not to be won. She snagged him with her talons. They stayed away from each other for the rest of Dad's visit, although Dad never ceased to admire her from a safe distance. Bando had to leave 2 or 3 days after Christmas. He had some papers to grade, and he started off reluctantly one morning, looking very unhappy about the way of life he had chosen. He shook hands all around and then turned to me and said, I'll save all the newspaper clippings for you, and if the reporters start getting too hot on your trail, I'll call the New York papers and give them a bum steer. I could see he rather liked the idea and departed a little happier. Dad lingered on a few more days, ice fishing, setting my traps and snares, and husking walnuts. He whittled some cooking spoons and forks. On New Year's Day, he announced that he must go. I told your mother I would only stay for Christmas. It's a good thing she knows me, or she might be worried. She won't send the police out to look for you? I asked hurriedly. Could she think you never found me? Oh, I told her I'd call her Christmas night if I didn't. He poked around for another hour or two, trying to decide just how to leave. Finally, he started down the mountain. He had hardly gone 100 feet before he was back. I decided to leave by another route. Somebody might backtrack me and find you, and that would be too bad. He came over to me and put his hand on my shoulder. You've done very well, Sam. He grinned and walked off toward the gorge. I watched him bound from rock to rock. He waved from the top of a large rock and leaped into the air. That was the last I saw of Dad for a long time.